Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. You're watching our cloud school. Today in this video we are going to talk about store procedure and lookup activities with Azure Data Factory. So let's use the demonstration to understand these two activities. So I'll be using this Data Factory instance for our demonstration. I'll click on this author where I can find all my factory resources. To explain this demo, I'm going to create a new pipeline by clicking on this add new resource pipeline. That will open the dashboard, and the activities which we are looking for is the store procedure and the lookup activity, which you can find it under general section. As you can see, this is where you have the store procedure and this is you have the lookup activity. Now both the activities are somehow similar or correlated with each other, and that is why in this demonstration I thought of combining the demo for both of these together so that you understand the correlation and use case of using both of these type of activities. Now as the activity name suggests, store procedure, you would be able to execute the store procedure activity, or you would be able to execute an store procedure onto a SQL Server database using this particular activity. So if I click on the activity and go to the settings, it requires two information. First is the link service. Obviously link service is going to be a SQL Server. If you do not have SQL Server link service, you can create by clicking on this create new link service, and that will basically open the option to create a new link service. As of now, I already have created the link service for the Azure SQL database. Here it is showing the Amazon RDS Azure SQL Server. The reason because it is having the type is in this, but you can change the type to these types. So you have these many types available which you can make use of it. Like these are the 5 different types which we can select: Amazon RDS SQL Server, database, management, Azure SQL managed instance, Synapse, and I believe this is going to be the managed instance of the SQL Server, right? Having that, so having the link service in place, which we have already created in this case, you can see that if I go to the edit option, I'm using the existing Azure SQL Server database instance. I've used the authentication option as an Azure SQL, which I'm using the Azure username and password to set up the connectivity between the SQL Server and my Azure Data Factory instance. So this is the link service I'll be using. Next, the store procedure name. So as the link service is connecting to my database, and in that database it will try and figure out all the store procedure name which it has. So just to show you what all store procedure our database has, I will open my database instance. So let me just click on the database instance, which I have here, which I have opened it here on the Azure Data Studio. So here are my list of table under the same SQL Server instance, and if I go to the programmatically, here are my list of store procedure which I have. So I have a store procedure to delete customer by customer ID, find a customer by with an expression, and then get the customer by name, right? So these are my store procedure names basically, which will find the details from this customer table. If I try and expand the data which we have available in the customer data table, just for an example, just to show you so that we can understand the result in the demonstration. Now moving back to our Data Factory pan, here we can specify the list of same store procedure as I'm connecting to the link service. You can also parameterize the name of the store procedure by clicking on this add or edit button, and from here you can use the dynamic expression. And from the dynamic expression, if you have the parameters like this, let's say I'll create a parameter sp underscore name, and from this parameter I can use the store procedure parameter and the parameter which has been created here. Yeah, that's the parameter I'm using it. So this is another way if you don't want to hardcode or select from a drop down. But for the demonstration, I'm going to just use the store procedure from a drop down. So get by name, and you have to obviously provide the name parameter value, because if you look at the definition of this store procedure, so let's find the definition of this store procedure by opening the so this is what the parameter it is looking for, contact name. And if I try and import, so I can do two things. I can add the parameters by clicking on the new button, or if you would like to explicitly import the store procedure parameter, you can click on the import. It will automatically import the parameter value or parameter name, and you can provide the value of that parameter. So if I go back to our query where we have the list of all our customer names, so I'm going to just copy the name value from here, and I'm going to specify the value like this. And that is it. Now if you try and validate, our activity is successfully going to be validated, our pipeline is validated, which means that if I'm going to run the pipeline now, it will execute the store procedure. It's asking for the parameter which I've defined, but I'm not using this parameter, so I'm just going to delete it because I've implicitly passed the parameter values directly, right? So as I'm running the store procedure, as it is immediately finished it just within the 3 seconds of time, the store procedure is completed. Now if I expand this, if you look at the result here on the result section, we have got this result, and in this result I was expecting the customer details to be returned, right, which is, let's say, this detail, correct, which is not the case, right? So what do I mean by that is, let's say if I create new query and I want to run execute store procedure, which is get customer by name and @contact name equals to whatever is the name we have provided. If I run it like this, I'm expecting this result as part of my pipeline execution, activity execution, right? But it's not the case here. Here it's returning some activity or some information about the pipeline execution, right? But no result. The reason for that is because your execute store procedures are not meant for returning a result, which means that you should never use this activity for a store procedure in which you are looking for some data to be returned by your store procedure. Whereas, so the question is, in which scenario I should be using this activity? So in the case where you would like to perform some kind of update, for an example, or if you would like to perform a deletion of some record, unused record, or some delete customer by customer ID, for example, which is this store procedure. If that is the case, then you can use this store procedure, which usually do not return the select from this table and all. So if that is the case, then you should use the activity. So let me just go to this particular store procedure and find out the parameter name, which is the customer ID in this case. Now if I try and give it a customer ID, right, customer ID, and ID I'm going to use this ID JREL, which is this one. Copy, right? Now if I try and run the record, it should basically delete the record from the table. Let's run that. If the store procedure ID value is correct, then of course it's going to do that. So a store procedure is successfully executed. Let's verify the result. As of now, it is returning 4 result, but now it has got 3 result only, which means that the customer is successfully deleted and it's doing the job what it is expected from. So the conclusion here is that you should use the store procedure activity in the case wherein you want to perform an action like insertion, deletion, update, but not the select statement, right? Now the question is, what if I would like to perform a select statement from the table? In that case, you can perform the select statement with the help of our second activity, which is this lookup activity, right? And that is what we are going to look at now. So I'm going to grab this lookup activity as an example, and this activity has got a setting. Of course, it requires the sources and data sets. So these are the data set which it can use right now. So let me just create a new data set because it's not directly working with the link service. So the difference between the store procedure activity and lookup activity, if you compare like to like, the store procedure activity directly using the link service, it was not using the data set, right? And with the help of link service, it was able to fetch the store procedure name, or even you can dynamically set the store procedure name. It can also import the parameter and all, and we were able to run it. Whereas in the lookup, it requires the data set, like your any other activity, copy activity requires the data set, or data flow requires the data set. Similarly, lookup activity is also dependent upon some kind of a data set. So which means that I have to create a data set, and if I click on new, then these are all my data set options. So any of the data type which is a storage option available across different cloud providers, those can be an option for dataset. Like even the storage account can be option for this dataset. As we are talking about the SQL Server and we want to run the select query from the SQL Server table using the store procedure, so I'm going to choose the Azure SQL database as in my dataset. I'm going to use the same link service which we have used with the store procedure activity. Here I'm not going to specify the table name because we are not looking for any table action directly. Actually, you can use the lookup table or lookup activity on a specific table. So what will happen is it will try and fetch the data from the table. For an example, if I use the customer table, let me just do that, click on OK. And if I try and run this activity now, let me just set a relationship between these two so that it will run after other. So what will happen now is using this lookup activity, what will happen, it will use this particular data set and it will use the table which we have mentioned in this data set, which is our customer table, the same table, and it will try to use the query on the table and it will return the record. And then we'll talk about the result, what it can do, what all the limitations and the permutation which you can have with this activity. So both the activities are completed. Now if I open the output section and look at the result here, it has returned the result as in this object, within this object. Now why the first row? Actually it has returned the data from the table which we are looking for, which is this customer ID, which is this first record. But why it is returning the first record? The reason for that is, if you look at the lookup table configuration, here is the option. We have first row only, which means that it will always select the first row from the table, which is because the use query option is selected as in table. So it means that it will run select top one from this particular table and it will return the record from the table. Apart from this, we have the query and store procedure, which I'll come back in a moment. But as soon as I unselect this option, which means that it should be able to select all my record from the table, right? So let me just rerun again, and this time we'll see the result. Again, this store procedure is still trying to execute the delete store procedure, but having the with the customer ID which is not exist, so it's not failing because it's not going to meet the condition and it's not going to perform any kind of a deletion from the table. Okay, so if now we look at the result of our second activity, which is lookup activity, and go to the output, you will find the difference because Now we have a value, and within the value you have an array, right, which is this one. Now that's a different thing, that each of these array values are having this is, it is having a space in between, right, like this. You can see that it has got a space, but that's the data issue. Ignore this. So the point is, when you uncheck the column value as in select one row or first row, then you would get a result on the value section, which will have a return as in one or many record. Now the limitation we have with the lookup activities, it can return only 5,000 records at max. If it is more than 5,000 record, for an example, if your table has more than 5,000 record, then the remaining record will be ignored. So it can only return 5,000 records. So that's a caveat which you have to remember. Now let's talk about the query option. So here in the query option, I can write the same thing. I can have a select top one star from customers, right? And like any query you can write, and then that should work as well. So let me just debug that again, and hopefully I should have a result with the first record. But even though the first record it will return, it should return the first record within the array, because we are not selecting a first record, we are asking to select all the record, but in a query it's anyways going to return one, but it will return one record as an array. So if we go back to our result activity, if I open that, you can see that we have our values tag with a one record, right? And it has got the object which we are looking for, like this, right, which is the object opening and the closing side, like this. Now let's talk about the third option with the lookup table, which is store procedure, and that is what we were talking about. Like store procedure, we should be using the like insert, update, delete kind of thing, but not the select. So if you are having a requirement to run a store procedure option with the select option, you should be doing this select option with this lookup option or lookup activity. Here I can select again the name of my store procedure. Let's use another store procedure which is having find customer with a value with an expression. So let's run or import the parameter. It has got the customer name which you can run it on, and here we have two customer names, or the contact name basically, starting from J. So what I'm going to do is I will pass the letter J, and I'm expecting these two records to be returned from my store procedure on my lookup activity. So you can pass both capital or small case J. So I'm going to pass small k J, and I'm going to run the query. So let's run that, and let's see how many record it returns. This time remember, we are using our third store procedure, which is get customer by the expression which you are passing. The activity is successfully completed. If I expand the result, this time again we have got the value which is two records, and each of the record basically having the contact name starting from letter J. Contact name is starting from letter J. Basically it has got like operators, even though it's not started with J, but it would have given the same result. But that's just one implementation which I wanted to show. But the whole point here is that you are able to execute a store procedure which can return the result, whereas the same store procedure which if let's say if I would have executed from here, let's say from here, by passing the same value, let's say J, what was the name of the customer, name of the parameter, the name of the parameter was contact name. If I try and run both of them now, lookup as well as store procedure activity using the same store procedure, right, let's see what is the result. Like we expect this not to provide any outcome, whereas this we anyways know that it will provide the outcome as in two record. So that is it. Our store procedure has been successfully executed. Now as we see, no outcome, nothing has been there here, as a result, no result, right? So we do not have any result as such. Whereas if I open this, you would see that we have a result as in the value with two records, same store procedure, same parameter, but one of them has got a value, one of them does not have any value. So that is it about this particular demonstration. So we have learned how to use the store procedure, how to use the lookup activity, what is the difference between store procedure and lookup activity, which one to use in which specific scenario in your pipeline development. I hope you have found this useful. If it is, please give it a thumbs up and do not forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Thanks for watching it. See you in the next video.